Welcome back. To continue our program, please give a round of applause to USHCC board member Monica Mantilla.
Good morning. I know everyone was partying and having a good time yesterday, so thank you for being early morning here at the breakfast. What a vibe and what an energy of this whole event. I want to give a shout out to Ramiro and his staff. They've just done a phenomenal job. Thank you. Thank you, Ramiro. So as many of you know, I have the honor of chairing the Educational Fund. It's USHCC 501c3 arm that augments the organization's mission through its programs and resources for 5 million Hispanic businesses and Hispanic chambers. The foundation has been growing substantially thanks to the wonderful work of the USHCC staff, of the USHCC board, and the phenomenal support of partners and corporations that fund our program. So thank you very much for your support. And we're incredibly proud to share that the Educational Fund has recently won an MBDA $3 million grant as a result of Treasury. Yes, thank you, MBDA. And this comes as a result of Treasury deploying $125 million to support diverse ecosystems to accelerate economic growth via access to capital. And today, I have the pleasure of introducing a dear friend whom I've had the joy of knowing for more than 15 years, working, collaborating with her. She's a true friend of USHCC as well. And her life is one that is incredibly aligned with the mission of USHCC. Under her current role as the first senior advisor to the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary Yellen, Janice has led incredible work towards an equitable recovery. She will share with us today some of the lessons to continue to drive equitable growth. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to Janice as the Senior Counselor to the Secretary on Racial Equity of the U.S. Department of Treasury. Janice has spent the last 2 decades of her life advancing economic equity solutions for communities of colors and breaking down the barriers that underpin those disparities in wealth and financial security by race and by gender. Janice's career has spanned local service, national advocacy, and international philanthropy. She launched her career in her native Northeast Ohio and Formicos Foundation, a community development corporation working in Howe and Glenville neighborhoods of Cleveland, Ohio. As a project manager, she developed and preserved affordable home ownership and rental opportunities for the residents of these historically African-American neighborhoods. She then spent 10 years in Unidos, then the National Council of La Raza, that we all so much love and respect, advocating for economic mobility and opportunities for Latino families. As the Director of Economic Policy, she led research, advocacy, and policy development in the areas of job creation and job quality, retirement security, housing, banking, community development, and consumer protection. Most recently, Janice served as the president of the J.P. Morgan Foundation. Under her leadership, the firm launched several critical initiatives that have expanded capital for entrepreneurs of color, improved access to banking products and services, expanded access to new job skills, and built more inclusive neighborhoods. Janice played a critical role in developing the firm's incremental $30 billion racial equity commitment. Janice has authored a number of publications on financial opportunity and economic mobility, and most recently, she co-authored Building Equitable Cities, How to Drive Economic Mobility and Regional Growth with Henry Cisneros and Jeff Lobel. Janice received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Malone College in Canton, Ohio, and a Master of Science degree from Cleveland State University. She's a proud Latina, a yoga instructor, mom to 1 daughter, 2 dogs, and a bunny. She lives with her husband and her family in Tacoma Park, Maryland. So Janice, thank you for being with us today. and for your phenomenal leadership to guide Treasury to invest in underserved market. Please help me to welcome Janice to the podium.
Thank you so much, Monica, for that kind introduction. And a special thank you to Ramiro, to Nelson, Ranieri, and the entire U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce for having me today. It is an honor to represent the Treasury Department as the department's first ever counselor for racial equity. Advancing equity for historically underserved people and places is a huge priority for the Biden-Harris administration and for the Treasury Department. Our efforts have delivered real results that aim to expand opportunities for all Americans to fully participate in and compete in the 21st century economy. Our work at Treasury is driven by an economic philosophy that is entirely consistent with what you all do every day. It recognizes that a key element of our economic growth going forward will come from investing in people, places, and infrastructure that have been marginalized, overlooked, and frankly, underestimated. And this includes so many of our Latino communities. For many of us in this room, this is a moral imperative. We get up every day thinking about this. But it's important to understand that this is also an economic necessity. For example, according to the McKinsey Institute, Latinos are estimated to account for 1 in 4 people in the United States by 2050 and 1 in 3 of its workers by 2060. In June, the Treasury Department partnered with the U.S. Hispanic Chamber and several other Latino nonprofits to host the department's first ever Latino Economic Summit. This was an important opportunity to reflect on the unique economic challenges and opportunities facing our families, businesses, and neighborhoods. We share a collective understanding that when we unleash the economic potential of our communities, it's not just good for our families, but for the entire economy. And that in order to build an economy that truly works for everyone, we have to fix the broken systems that have sidelined too many of our families, businesses, and communities. For the Biden-Harris administration, this strategy started with prioritizing an equitable recovery. I don't have to remind this group how challenging the situation was at the beginning of 2021. Latino unemployment had reached an all-time high. Latino workers were overrepresented in frontline jobs and exposed to COVID-19. In fact, Latinos were 2.3 times more likely to die from the disease. Many Latino nonprofits, likely many of you in the room, we banded together to support vaccine distribution, employment support and training, care for our children, support our businesses. We worked together to ensure that Latino communities could take advantage of American Rescue Plan resources, such as the Emergency Rental Assistance Program and the Homeowner Assistance Program. We took specific steps to ensure that Latino families, including all of our residents, our families in Puerto Rico, could access and benefit from these programs. And I want to just give you a couple examples. When it came to preventing evictions and foreclosures among Latino and other communities, we encouraged state and local ERA and HAF programs to use data to identify community needs, to specifically invest in culturally relevant partners, and work with Hispanic media, unions, and faith leaders to reach families most in need. And these efforts really paid off. The programs helped keep Latino families in their homes, preventing the kind of massive displacement and wealth loss that we saw between 2008 and 2012. Research has found that nearly 1/3 of ERA rental assistance funds went to Hispanic households, and 20% of homeowners assisted by the HAF program identify as Hispanic. This is deeply personal for me. During the Great Recession, as Monica said, when we first met, I was working at Unidos US, then National Council of La Raza, and I was working to secure new mortgage protections for Latino families, and I was going around the country hosting foreclosure rescue fairs. I authored original research looking at the impact of foreclosures on Latino families and children. I sat across from families that were losing everything, and it was utterly heartbreaking. I'm sure that many of you both did that in your communities, maybe even experienced it personally. The fact that this time around we avoided the kind of massive foreclosures and evictions is not a foregone conclusion. It took deliberate policy and partnership with trusted organizations. Thanks to our work together, we have had the most equitable and broad-based economic recovery in modern history. Hispanic unemployment hit a record low last September. Median weekly earnings increased 2.4%, even after accounting for inflation. And in 2021, one in four new businesses were started by Latinos. We are taking these lessons and we're now applying it to how we drive inclusive, equitable growth through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. I want to take a minute and share with you, I know that some of Treasury's work is really wonky, and I'm going to ask you to bear with me because it's important. We unveiled 5 strategies that we're taking when we hosted the Latino Summit in June, and I want to briefly share those strategies with you. First, if you're taking notes, there's 5. This is the first one. We're responding to 2 things that small businesses need most: access to customers and access to capital. The State Small Business Credit Initiative, everybody in here should write this down. Your state has this program. It provides nearly $10 billion to states, the District of Columbia, territories, and tribes to increase capital and promote entrepreneurship. $2.5 billion of this funding is set aside specifically to support underserved businesses. It also includes the technical assistance that Monica mentioned earlier, both directly to states and in partnership with MBDA. We're partnering with 6 other agencies to create a no wrong door policy so that wherever you walk into, whether it's an MBDA, an SBA, you're getting the relevant programs and support. And Treasury's doing its part too. We are doing more business with Latino-owned companies. There has been a 23% increase in the dollar amount of prime contracts Treasury awarded to Hispanic-owned businesses since FY 2020. Second, we're deploying mission capital via Latino-owned and serving financial institutions to develop health clinics, daycare centers, affordable housing, and support small businesses. The Emergency Capital Investment Program has invested $1.6 billion in Latino-owned and Latino majority shareholder depository institutions. So that's banks and credit unions. Based on our early analysis, we're projecting that those investments across the entire portfolio could increase lending in our communities by nearly $58 billion over the next decade. We're also working with the nonprofit loan funds, community development financial institutions. We announced $1.73 billion in grants for the Equitable Recovery Program, and this includes a historic investment of $226 million in grants to 69 cooperativas in Puerto Rico. Earlier this summer, the Deputy Secretary joined Senators Warner and Crapo to announce that the Economic Opportunity Coalition, a group of more than 24 foundations and companies, had reached their goal of securing $1 billion in deposits to support those depositories I mentioned earlier that have received federal funds. Those deposits will allow them to further on-lend the funds they've received from Treasury. Third, we're modernizing our tax delivery system. During the pandemic, Treasury steered the deployment of funds that kept families afloat. Think the child tax credit, which helped reduce childhood poverty amongst Latino kids from 30% down to 8%, and for the first time was widely available in Puerto Rico. But the IRS has not had the funds it needs to deliver strong customer service, including how we support small businesses. So we rolled out a new strategic operating plan thanks to the funds from the Inflation Reduction Act. And here are some things that we're doing. We're enhancing taxpayer support in languages other than English, scaling our outreach to make sure that we're supporting all communities. We're becoming fully digital and improving taxpayer experience, including exploring how we modernize the individual tax identification number process. We're developing a pilot so that people can file taxes directly with the IRS without having to go through a third party. And when we shared a prototype of this product with potential tax filers, Those that were limited English speakers, specifically Spanish speakers, were more likely than other tax filers to tell us that this is a kind of product that would help save them time and money. And we're expanding our free tax return prep sites in Puerto Rico. In 2021, we had 10. In 2022, we had 250. Fourth, we're helping to deliver lower energy costs and improve economic growth in low-income communities. The Inflation Reduction Act is one of the most significant economic investments in generations, and it's ambitious in its climate goals. I know it's wonky. I need you to write that down, the Inflation Reduction Act, because it is more than $270 billion of tax incentives that are going to be flowing that have the potential both to transform our neighborhoods, but also are a critical opportunity for our small businesses. For example, the Low-Income Community Bonus Credit Program is key to ensuring that all Americans benefit from the growth of clean energy. It boosts the investment tax credit for solar and wind energy products, specifically in low-income communities, by up to 20 percentage points. I would love to talk to anybody after this about ways that we are supporting small businesses and their ability to compete effectively for this tax credit. There's also new guidance on transferability. Okay, I know that it's wonky, but what this means is that for certain tax credits, if you are a state and municipality, if you are a nonprofit, you can get paid directly by the IRS. No more having to sell your tax credit on the secondary market. We're making sure that there is prevailing wage wherever possible in the jobs created through the Inflation Reduction Act. Finally, the investments that I described present important opportunities for our families, businesses, and communities. But a key aspect of my role is making sure that this is not fleeting with a single administration. We are building the subject matter expertise, we're building in the career staff so that we have the muscle memory, the power to continue long after this administration, the Treasury Department's efforts to make sure that the economy truly works for everyone. Cesar Chavez famously told us that we cannot seek achievements for ourselves and forget about progress and prosperity for our community. Our ambitions must be broad enough to include the aspiration and needs of others, for their sakes and for our own. My hope is that we can advance strategies that invest in and elevate marginalized and the underestimated. This is how we will build an economy that truly works for all. Thank you so much for what you do every day on behalf of Latino communities, Latino businesses. It is a true pleasure, Ramiro, to partner with you and the entire USHCC family. Thank you so much.
Here to help welcome our next featured speaker is President of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Louisiana and USHCC board member, Mayra Pineda.
On behalf of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, I would like to welcome you to our second day of conference and the conversation around how Hispanic businesses will continue to drive the economy. Nearly 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses contribute over $800 billion to the American economy annually. 1 in 4 new businesses, which provide critical sources of new jobs, are Hispanic-owned and represent fastest growing segment of the U.S. small businesses. However, we all know too well the disparities and barriers Latino businesses face daily. With better access to loans, investments, and contracts, this rapidly growing sector could benefit even more Americans and generate wealth in Hispanic and non-Hispanic communities. The work of local chambers advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion is critical to help erase these systemic barriers, preventing businesses to scale and grow. To reach our goals, it is key to collaborate with organizations that work tirelessly to encourage Hispanic representation and inclusion in areas of employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. Today, it is my honor to introduce a person that has dedicated his life to elevating diverse talent to corporate boards. Sid Wilson, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, ASER, since 2014, where he manages a growing staff of dedicated professionals. He leverages more than 30 years of corporate finance and Wall Street equity research experience to work closely with corporations, CEOs, board of directors, and chief diversity officers to increase representation of Hispanics at all levels of corporate America. Wilson is a proud Dominican American with Bergen County, New Jersey roots, and has served the community through prominent nonprofit boards and leading advocacy groups. I would also like to take a moment of privilege to officially welcome him to New Orleans, Louisiana, where he will be hosting a national conference in just a couple weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Mr. Sid Wilson a warm USHCC welcome. Thank you.
All right. Buenos dias, mi gente. All right, as you can see, I am not going to be speaking from the podium. I have no notes because after 9 years as being the CEO for HASER, I better know my stuff. So first, a big thank you to the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the amazing board. Thank you, Chairman Nelson Ranieri, Chair-elect Jackie Puente. I saw the immediate past chair, Janice Rodriguez. I see you, Janice, there you are. And to all of you, but also a big thank you to the incomparable President and CEO, Ramiro Cavazos. Give Ramiro a big applause. So I had the honor to give you an update on what are we seeing in corporate America based on the work that we have been doing at HASER, and what are the challenges, and also what are we doing about it. So let me first give you just some key updates on where we are. The reality is that despite the fact that our community has grown, despite the fact that our economic power has grown, we know based on our good friends at the Latino Donor Collaborative who came out with their recent GDP report saying that we crossed the $3 trillion marker for the first time, making us the 5th largest economy in the world. But it actually gets even bigger than that when we recognize that we are dollar denominated, so there's no currency risk. If Moody's and S&P were to rate us, we'd be AAA rated as Latinos. We are in the fastest growing economy with an English-dominant, 2nd largest Spanish-speaking country with an average age of 28 and a mode age of 11. If you were investing in a country like that, we know that we would be a winning strategy for any company. But we also know that the business case has been talked about for years. And so one of the things that HASER is doing, and this is why I'm so excited to be here in front of you, is to recognize that the strategies that have been that we've been doing for many years is not necessarily working to where we are. The fact is that despite our growth, only 5% of Fortune 500 corporate boards are held by Latinos. Only 1% are held by Latinas. There is only one, not 1%, one person who is serving as a Latina Fortune 500 CEO, Priscilla Moldoval at Fannie Mae. And so the question is, what exactly is taking place and what are the challenges that we can do as a community? What can we do to make sure that Latino businesses and many of you that are corporate leaders, as well as allies of our community, to make a difference? So many years ago, we embarked on a very bold mission, and that was to map out wherever Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 CEOs convene and get together and get into the room. You know, I'm a firm believer that there is no table of 10 that could not fit an 11th seat. And sometimes, and many of you that are business owners understand, sometimes you don't wait for that invitation to come, just take the chair and then nudge some people over and get to the table and declare your presence. And so many years ago, about 5 years ago, we embarked on a strategy, and it started when we went to Davos, Switzerland at the World Economic Forum, where we were uninvited, no credentials, no invitation at all, but we did not wait for a red carpet invitation to come. We flew out there, we went there, and we made our presence. What has happened since then, 5 years later? Well, now I'm happy to say that HACER in the last 9 months has interacted and met with more Fortune 500 CEOs in just these last 9 months than what we've done in the last 30 years. In fact, next week, we will be the first Latino nonprofit ever to address the Fortune 500 Global CEO Summit that's happening next week in Washington and at the end of November in Abu Dhabi, with the message of this. Number one, what are you as CEOs doing to advance Hispanic inclusion? Not necessarily what your teams are doing. What are you doing, Mr. and Mrs. CEO? What is your sponsorship strategy? Because we know that the path into the C-suite and the path into the executive roles is not going to happen by showing your resume. We know that under today's corporate structure, it goes like this. Show me your resume, I'll show you a mid-level manager job. Show me your sponsorship, I'll show you the C-suite. Show me your credibility, and I'll show you a board seat. And so the challenge that we have is under the prism of today's corporate structure is that they're not giving us the credibility that we know that we deserve in order to increase those numbers of proportion to where we are as a community. And so that way, our message is number one, it's acculturation, not assimilation. It's acculturation, not assimilation, because we know that we are proud Latino, mi gente, and we should not have to leave our Latinidad at the door when we go into these positive positions. So stop asking us to look for qualified, fit, all these typical buzzwords that are normal when you hear a paradigm that has been in there for the last 150 years. But then there's more to that. We know that when we are in the room, that we must declare our presence. I'll tell you a funny story, but it's a true story. This past January, when I was in a roundtable of CEOs, they went around to each CEO, and they were all Fortune 500 CEOs. I was a sole nonprofit CEO. And then when they got to me, I said, I gotta do something that's gonna make them remember that we're present. So as they were all mentioning their names, they came to me, and they were expecting me to say it in English. My name is Sid Wilson, I'm the CEO for HACER. But instead I said, mi nombre es Sid Wilson. Soy Latino Dominicano de pura cepa Tambora, ya tú sabes. And true story. And then I said that if you don't understand what I just said, then it's not my obligation to assimilate to you because we are the community that is growing and you need to acculturate to us. That's what I call declaring. And how many of you are in those rooms? You might be the only one in the room and someone that is there for whatever the business purpose reason. My encouragement to all of you is to declare. Declare tu presencia, declare tu latinidad, and let everyone know who you are and continue to do that. And so, and after you've completed that, then your role is how do you make sure that you open up the doors for more to enter the room? Today, HACER's done something that has not been done before. I am now the first CEO to be a member of what I call the quadrifecta of the CEO councils. I'm a member of the Wall Street Journal CEO Summit, the Fortune Magazine Global CEO Initiative, the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, and thanks to my good friends at Comcast NBC Universal, I'm now the sole Latino on the CNBC CEO Council. But when you're at the table, we all have an obligation to speak up. What can we do to make sure that they are sponsoring more initiatives for Hispanic business? What can be done to make sure that we are elevating Latinos and particularly Latinas? And what can we do to make sure that it's not just, thank you, also Latinas, un aplauso para Latinas. And then lastly is something that I know that every one of us can do. I believe in the concept that when you plan to achieve, but you dare to exceed, then great results you will see. When you plan to achieve, but you dare to exceed, then great results you will see. No one thought that 5 years ago that we would be at the table with over 120, 150 of the Fortune 500 CEOs like what we accomplished this year so far. And that doesn't include what's going to happen next week and the rest of the year. No one ever thought that what started as a concept of me going to the World Economic Forum by myself, this January we'll bring the largest HACER team in history. We're bringing 6 team members to scour the area to connect with CEOs. But the message is when we are face-to-face, and this is my message to you, is that everyone knows who we are. We have to declare who we are when we are in these meetings and gatherings, and let the CEOs know that our time is now. Nuestro tiempo es ahora, no mañana, ahora. And it's either you're going to engage with us or somebody else will, and with an average age of 28, knowing full well that our loyalties have not yet been established as a community, the time is now. So I want to thank every one of you for what you are doing here at the USHCC. I want to thank the board. I want to thank my incredible board chair, Ramiro Cavazos, who has helped and supported the work that we're doing at HACER. Next week, we are ringing the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange, and we're being recognized by NASDAQ, which is the first time that's ever been done in 2 exchanges almost on the same week. And that's going to be, thank you. So if you're Brent Wilkes, by the way, now you know Brent. It's walking distance from Brent. But I want to just say how thankful we are. We have a lot of work to do, and all of us together, juntos, podemos seguir para adelante. So with that, muchas gracias, and all have a great conference, and we'll see you on the front lines where we make a difference to advance Hispanic inclusion in corporate America. Thank you very much, everybody. Muchas gracias.
Thank you for your insight, Sid. And now, to introduce our keynote speaker is USHCC Board Chair, Nelson Raineri, Jr.
Buenos dias. ¿Cómo están? What a fantastic day. I'll be very brief, which is not always possible for Cuban Americans, but I'm going to do my best. Okay. You know, Sid, thank you, Sid, for your leadership. And look around the talent here. Let's help Sid live that mission. I come from Seattle. In Seattle, just to give you a fact, I looked at the top 20 publicly traded companies. Guess the number of those companies that have Hispanics on their board? Close, 3. So why? Okay. But we appreciate the ones that do, and we want to help the ones that don't, because they'll get there. I just want to be very brief in the introduction, but I want to leave it with a quote. John Adams said that facts are stubborn things. But the rest of that phrase is a very interesting one. It said that despite our inclinations or the passion or the dictates of our passions, they do not alter the facts in the state of evidence. So with that as context, we thought it was very important. Ramiro, thank you for your leadership, and Raul, your idea of bringing an economist, and not just an economist. We have the Lionel Messi of economists, not just because he's from Argentina, but because he's a chief economist for Raymond James. Raymond James is located nearby. is a global financial services firm that manages over $175 billion in assets. So we're playing at the highest level in terms of thought leadership. Prior to that, Dr. Eugenio Alemán was the chief economist for the Energy Information Administration. I'm in the energy industry, I work for NRG, and if you've not been to that site and you like data, you like energy, that's a good model. And it also speaks to the available resources that are out there, because information is power. Dr. Alemán, prior to that, had worked for Wells Fargo. So he has a PhD from FIU. And again, rather than take any more time, please give a very warm welcome for Dr. Eugenio Alemán.
Buenos días. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be here. So I am going to try to make sense of the U.S. economy. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and he said, oh, you are the economists in the room. And I say, well, how many people are here? 500? So there are 501 economists. So I have to compete with 500 economists sitting down here. So let's see if I can do that. So let me start by, you will probably see all these numbers during the rest of the conference, but we are becoming a force, or we have become a force to reckon with in the US. And that's why people are looking at us, correct? And that's why there are so many companies here representing or sponsoring Latino communities and Latino businesses. And you can see that we are growing. We are very small, but we are growing at a very, very fast pace. You can see that by the number of businesses and the revenue compared to, growth in revenue compared to wide businesses. Very fast growth, very small today, you can see that. 380,000 businesses, but we are growing at a much higher pace than the rest of the sectors in the US economy. So this is inflation, correct? And I know that I spent 16 years for Wells Fargo, and I never talk about inflation, yes? But for the last 2 years, this is the only thing that I talk about, correct? And I have heard that people say that we are going into a stagflation, or that we are at stagflation today. That makes no sense, correct? There is no stagflation in the US economy like there was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Why? Because economic growth back then, potential growth, was about 4%, yes? Today, it's about 1.8%. So stagnation means very little growth compared to potential. Back then, we were growing at 2.5%, but our potential was 4%. Today, we are growing at about 5% or 3.5%, but potential is 1.8%. So yes, there are reasons why inflation is high today, because of everything that has happened during the pandemic, and inflation is coming down. Slowly but surely, inflation is coming down. One of my biggest fears today, and I think that this is the biggest fear for the Federal Reserve, is that credit card lending is growing too fast. You can see that from this graph. I have two measures there. One is nominal lending, which is the darker line, and the other one is real lending. And you can see that total lending is, it's not growing at all, very, very small. Real lending is coming down, correct? Nominal lending is growing, but real lending is very, very weak. Compared to the pre-Grand Recession era, correct, which was a typical monetary cycle, yes, where money supply was growing very fast, banks were lending a lot. So this is not happening today. So there are no those stresses that we had before the Great Recession. You can see that mortgage lending in real terms is almost flat today. It's very weak. The only thing that is growing fast is credit card lending. And this is very troublesome because we have a recession in our forecast, a very mild recession. And if you lose your job and you have very large credit card debt, then you are going to be in trouble. For the financial institutions that lend, it's going to be trouble also. Why? Because this is unsecured lending. Not only that, for customers, it's very high. They are paying upwards of 20% in interest on those credit cards. So that is the biggest concern for the Fed, and that is the reason the Fed continues to increase interest rates. We think that they are going to go once more before the end of this year, and stop at 5.75, but we will see what happens. Look at this. This is wages and salaries. If your wages are not as high as this, let your employer know. So this is by industry, and you can see how by industries, financial activities, almost 6%. So these are two measures of inflation. The light blue dashed line is year-over-year inflation. So that is about 3.7%. But what is important is the 12-month average, because we don't buy goods only 1 month. We buy over time. So that number is still very high. These are wages and salaries increases by industry. You can see that the US economy has been growing like crazy. Look, the pandemic, we had a drop of almost 40% in 1 quarter, but then it went up back by 40%. And then it remained very strong. Remember, I said that potential output for the US economy is 1.8%. We have been growing way higher than that for the last 2 years. And that is the reason why inflation is so high. It is not stagflation, it's too much growth. And this is what the Federal Reserve wants to do. Slow down growth, slow down personal consumption expenditures, which are growing too fast. 70% of the US economy is personal consumption, so that is what the Fed wants to do, slow down consumption. Of course, Americans are not attuned at what the Fed wants to do. They couldn't care less. Why? Because, look, this is what happened during the pandemic. This is disposable personal income in real terms, yes? This top line. And look at that. These were all the checks that were issued by the federal government to individuals and firms. We had a check of $1,200 in April of 2020. We had a $600 check on December of 2020. Then a $1,400 check in March of 2021. Then we had those who were on unemployment insurance, they had $600 more per week extra in unemployment insurance during a year. And then we had PPPs, PPP loans for firms. And you know what happened when there's free money, no? Everybody buys Maseratis and Mercedes-Benz and goes around. Then you get caught, correct? But look at this. At the same time that we were not consuming, which is this line, we were receiving enormous amounts of money. So enormous that we hoarded $2.5 billion in excess savings. And this is what we have been living over the last 2 years. And we are enjoying it. And we are living la vida loca, like Ricky Martin used to say, correct? Because we still have some monies. Those monies are coming down, but, you know, the economy seems to be, this is the leading economic indicator. Normally, when the leading economic indicator goes down, we go into a recession, and that you can see every time that the leading economic indicator goes down, we go into a recession. I mean, we have been going down with the leading economic indicator for more than a year and a half, actually, and the economy is still resilient just because we still have some monies. At the same time, employment remains relatively strong. Not as strong as at the beginning of the year, but you can see that employment has remained relatively strong. So the US economy is still growing. The labor force participation rate is recovering from the recession. You know what? I mean, there's people that say that Americans don't want to come back to the labor force. That makes no sense. Prime age labor force participation is at an all-time high. Prime age is 16 to 54. The problem is that everybody's retiring, correct? We still have 10,000 Americans retiring per business day today. Baby boomers, yes? My wife was working. Then she had to take care of my parents, and well, my parents passed away. She doesn't want to go back. There are many people in the baby boomer age that don't want to go back to work because they are already set. Unless you pay them more, correct? And they are coming, and you can see that they are coming back slowly but surely. Housing market has tanked because of higher interest rates, but we have been seeing some recovery over the last 6 months or so. Home prices are starting to move up. Even with 7%, 8% mortgage rates, the housing market is no longer, or is recovering from its own recession. So normally, what happens is that the housing market drives, so higher interest rates drives the housing market lower. This time, the housing market has not been enough to push the US economy into recession. One of the reasons, but basically there are 3 reasons. The CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, and the IRA. All those acts are giving incentives for companies to invest in US manufacturing, plants, and that has kept non-residential investment afloat. And that is the reason why the US economy has continued to grow. You can see that the manufacturing sector is in recession. Any number below 50 means recession. You can see that it has been in recession for the last year or so. But manufacturing is about 15% of the US economy, so the service sector is still booming. We are still living la vida loca, correct? But we are using income and credit cards, yes? At some point in time, that is going to come down. The best news that I have is that debt as a percentage of disposable personal income is at 90%. That is the best news. You know that debt doesn't matter, isn't it? You know that. That is a joke. You can laugh. But the truth is that we were at 125% of income before the Great Recession. So this is much better today. But in fact, debt doesn't matter. Why? Because what matters is what we pay to service that debt. And the debt service ratio is the lowest, or has remained the lowest for the last 40 years, correct? So the amount of money that we have to spend, this is on average, correct? The poor are in really bad shape today. Don't get me wrong, yes? But on average, this is what happens, and that is what is happening to the US economy. So, in summary, what we have is a very mild recession starting in the first quarter of next year, very, very mild. For this year, 2.1%. I'm sorry, 2.1% for this year, 2.1% for 2023, let's say, and 0.4%. So still small growth, but the US economy remains resilient. And you know, you can sign up for our distribution list. We write daily and weekly reports. And as a very good friend of mine always says, when I explain something to him, he says, Eugenio, thank you very much for your explanation. I am still confused, but at a higher level. Thank you very much.